will move projects forward. I looked at the Crawford Nickel project, for
Yep.
example. It's 3 years into its approval process. The Impact Assessment Agency doesn't begin its work until next year. How exactly does the MPO move that project forward?
Well, it turns out that the Major Projects Office that has been started by Mark Carney is nothing more than a way to delay projects that are already near completion. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. So the Mark Carney government is trying to throw up a bunch of smoke screens so that he can try to convince people that he's making investments. And there's indications that these investments are quote unquote investments that the Liberal government is talking about actually only line the pockets of Mark Carney and his friends. What I don't like is that they are none of them benefiting Canadians. They are also many years from completion, and even though they are moved along in the approval process before the Carney government took a look at it, they are still years away. And that kind of thing is not the fastest in history ever since World War II, and all the rhetoric and all the false flags that the Liberal government has been using to try to convince people that they're actually getting something done. And it makes me concerned that the Canadians are not watching the reality on the ground. However, as we get into it, I want to encourage all of you to like, comment, subscribe, share this channel with all of your socials. Let's get into this. I know a lot of the mainstream media is making a big deal about this recent announcement by the Mark Carney government on how they're fast-tracking a bunch of other projects. Of course, anybody who looks at the situation just briefly understands that they are, in fact, fast-tracking nothing. That all of the projects up to now that they have announced are already many years into development, and some of them are right there ready to cross the finish line and are now actually being delayed because they have this new government department to go through with this $750,000 a year CEO that's in charge of it without bonuses, because you can be darn sure that if the CEO of CBC gets a bonus, the CEO of this company will get a bonus. Not you and I. No. We don't deserve bonuses, don't you know? Anyway, let's look at a couple of things geographically. We know that much of northern British Columbia went conservative in the last federal election, and we know that the LNG that all of a sudden Mark Carney is behind, and the hydroelectric line that they're running to power the LNG is in northern British Columbia, conveniently enough. Further, we know that the nickel mines are in northern Ontario, and that is also a region where the Liberals lack a lot of support. So they clearly are trying to, again, bribe the Canadian voter. Now, fortunately for most of us, the northern people, they're not in the city. So they're not going to go ahead and vote along blindly. They have real issues, real concerns in their day-to-day life. And further, they're not going to be bought by a job or a project that might empower them 3-5 years from now to have a half-decent job. They need help and they need assistance right now. Unfortunately, the Liberal government is not going to be the government to provide that assistance, because the Liberal government, for all of their talk, doesn't seem to have a clue what one or the other is doing or what one or the other's mandate is, including themselves. When I hear people say that it doesn't seem like the Liberal government has any idea what they're doing, they're saying a lot of platitudes but have no idea on the reality on the ground, and I'm one of those people. We can see evidence of it in this last tranche of announcements. I'm just going to take two examples that were happening simultaneously at two of these very different announcements. Like, one was in British Columbia, like I said, and one was in Northern Ontario. And how these Liberals didn't seem to know what the other hand was doing. And it points to a problem for Canadians, because it's a lot of promises, it's a lot of this, it's a lot of fancy, flowy words with absolutely no completion. First, we're going to go to the Crawford mine announcement, and we'll listen to MP Hodgson take a couple of questions, who I believe is the Natural Resources Minister. If you pay a little bit of attention to the amount of and ah that this MP, supposed to be, a pillar of the community and leader of the people and all the rest of it, can't seem to get out a sentence without talking like somebody who doesn't even have a grasp of the language.
The world right now, there are non-market actors. There are nations which are using their control over critical minerals for geopolitical purposes and, quite frankly, geopolitical coercion.
First of all, if you have the ability to control the market with coercion or otherwise, there is no way in the world you cannot be called a non-market actor. The problem is that everybody went after China's lax environmental laws and their cheap labor to process all of these raw and critical minerals and turn them into the finished product. And now you're surprised that they hold it against you.
I can tell you that in my conversations, when I was recently in Berlin, in London, talking with my colleagues who are visiting Japan, Korea, India, what we hear is that this manipulation of supply chains is fundamentally putting the economics in our economies at risk. I can tell you that when, for example, China put export restrictions on a number of critical minerals, many major manufacturers were close to shutting down their operations.
It's funny, I didn't hear about any of that from your propaganda media. Maybe you should be more specific and tell us which exactly organizations you're referring to, because as far as I know, many of them are reaching into other stockpiles and developing markets in other places.
That's not good for Canada. That's not good for our allies. The reality is nickel is one of those commodities that are being manipulated today. Crawford is a step to debottlenecking or reducing that stranglehold on critical minerals. As was said, it's the second largest deposit in the world. In a world where today the West has three choices. They have Russia, they have China, or they have Canada. A lot of our allies really don't like the other two choices.
I wonder what he means by a lot of our allies. As far as I understand, we are now supporting Venezuela. Mark Carney loves China. I mean, he is invested heavily in China. He is trying to convince Canadians that the Chinese can, supplant the Americans for trade barriers. Further, why is it that this nickel, if it's so crucial to the system, and nickel is exceedingly crucial. There's a lot of things that can be done without. There's a lot of things that can be replaced. Nickel has been crucial since the very beginning. Like in World War II, before we had many of these minerals that we're talking about now, we were still using lots and tons and tons and tons of nickel. And Canada has a nickel because it's like we have a lot of it. It's one of the only countries in the world that has it in great abundance. Russia is another one, of course. Unfortunately for us, Canada sends a lot of it out in raw to have it processed in China because it makes other people more money and takes the jobs away from Canada. To have control over these critical resources is what we need to be discussing. Of course, what I want to point out with MP Hodgson is how many times he said in that segment, which had to be 50. Further, how he all of a sudden is against China when a minute ago Carney was over there bragging about how he's going to go back to China and talk with him later. It's the first time in 8 years, blah, 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 blah. Which, of course, is par for the course with the Liberal government, who doesn't really pay attention to the last words that just come out of their mouth. All they want to do is make you think. They just need to frame a sentence in such a way that makes you believe that they're competent and capable and that they've got everything under control. If you look at the glaring contradiction and the doublespeak, you would say to yourself that they clearly have no idea what they are doing. So it's just the guy's name because he was calling in from remotely and he was asking a question as it pertains to the Major Projects Office, or what you might hear them refer to as MPO. This is a kind of a glaring contradiction that we as Canadians need to look at. MP Hodgson is asked about the MPO, and then we hear, like in the next clip, we'll hear directly from the CEO of the MPO, or whatever they happen to be calling her now, the director, I suppose. The difference is what we're going to be highlighting in this particular video.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My question is for Minister Hodgson. The announcement today is obviously just referring projects to the Major Projects Office for consideration, but so far no project has actually received that national interest designation. I'm just wondering, when does the government expect the Major Projects Office to return with recommendations and proposed conditions? And when could we see the first projects receiving that national interest designation?
Fairly straightforward question. How long is this going to take to get approval? I mean, that's what he wants to know. When can we put shovels in the ground? When will jobs and economy start to flow off this particular Crawford mine announcement?
Thanks for the question, Nick. That's up to the Major Projects Office and the head of that, Don Farrell. Don is an amazing business leader who's built projects of all kinds across Canada. To the extent that we can deliver projects by de-pancaking permitting, which is one of the things was just talked about here, to the extent that we can help organize financing using some of the tools that we've talked about, working with them to get offtake agreements from OEMs, us doing stockpiling agreements, opportunities around Canada Infrastructure Bank, EDC, et cetera. To the extent that we don't need a designation, then that's all good. What Don will do and is committed to do is, if a project needs designation, it will get designated, and within 2 years or shorter, the goal is to have it shorter, you would get a conditions document for operating. So what you should expect is Don and the Major Projects Office to work through projects to debottleneck them from a permitting perspective, to help them get the financing they need to get going. And if designation is required to do that, she will designate it. If it's not needed, they're off to the races and we're all good.
So if I understand you correctly, MP Hodgson, what you're tell me to do is that this, or what you're saying this MPO will do is, first of all, you have no idea how it's going to expedite the process. This mine is already 3 years into approval, and you'll hear from another fella across the country in British Columbia that the Environmental Assessment Agency won't be looking at them until 2026. So here's at least 4 years. We are going to have to stop and wait while this Major Projects Office has a look at it, spending all of that taxpayers' money, doing all of that delay, buying people's lunches, paying for their fancy computers, all the rest of it, giving them a car allowance and all the kinds of things that, you know, these types of individuals do when they write things off. And they may come out after 18 months and say, oh, well, we don't think that you need one of our fancy pieces of paper, our hall pass. So don't worry about it. We don't need to distinguish this as a national project. And thanks for playing. So we've wasted 18 months waiting for them to tell us that we don't need it. How is that anything but bottlenecking? How is that anything but interference and slowing things down? How is that anything except being in the way? And I believe that when you hear Pierre Poilievre say get out of the way, you can see a great example of it right here. He was asked a straightforward question: how much longer is this going to take to get this mine up and running? And how are these people that we're spending millions and perhaps billions of dollars on, giving them a new building, giving them a fancy parking space, and giving them all the, $700,000 just for this one lady alone? Can you imagine what her assistant is worth, or her 2 assistants, and the couple of people that are underneath her? Now all of a sudden we're into the, you get 10 of them in the room, they're probably collectively worth $2 million, right? We're throwing all this taxpayer money at this, and he can't even give us a straight answer on how that's expected to expedite the process. And this is the Minister of Natural Resources. So how is it that the Minister of Natural Resources has no idea what the projects office, which is going to be primarily about our natural resources development, is going to do to assist him in his jacket? No clue. Just doesn't have an idea one way or the other. And you see it here. He said more than he said anything else. Meanwhile, out in British Columbia, another reporter was asking Mark Carney the exact same question. How is this MPO going to help this project, specifically the Crawford Mine project?
We'll move projects forward. I looked at the Crawford Nickel project, for example. It's 3 years into its approval process. The Impact Assessment Agency doesn't begin its work until next year. How exactly does the MPO move that project forward?
Okay. Well, the answer to that is standing behind me. Would you want to take this, Don, or do you want? I think she came all the way here. I think we should let the CEO of the Major Projects
yeah.
Office answer that.
So here she is, ladies and gentlemen, and I know she's been in front of committee, but this is her first time in front of one of these announcements as far as I can tell. And I don't think that she has the capability to withstand anybody that's not giving her a softball question, just like Mark Carney, just like everyone in the Liberal Party. They're too cowardly to face any scrutiny. But this lady gets $700,000, and her job is to expedite processes for Canada, for Canadians to start to develop economic prosperity, economic independence from the United States. I mean, think of all the things that Mark Carney says about this particular office and this particular individual and why we pay her $700,000 plus expenses. I mean, that fancy little polar bear button. I wonder how much that cost. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you. So for many of our projects, they've been in development for quite a while, and there's a lot of work as you get to the end of the line, and you need to pull things over. So for projects like Crawford, we're working to come up with processes where we can run all the permitting in parallel, so that we're not doing it sequentially. So something that might have taken 5 or 6 more years can now take 2 years.
Oh, I see. So you're basically just going to do something at the same time as another department is going to do it, but you need to develop a process in that? Listen, I don't need to develop a process. Just do it at the same time. No problem at all.
We're working with them to ensure that they have the proper pricing that they need in order to support the project, because as the Prime Minister has talked about, there are other jurisdictions that are trying to keep prices really low, so that jurisdictions like Canada don't purchase.
Oh, so you're a banker. You're the one that's going to be funding the money. You're an American investment banker who is deciding whether or not they have the viability of the profit margin. I can tell you one way we can get the prices down is to get the environmental taxes and all the permitting delays out of the way. Every time somebody puts in an application at the municipal level or the provincial level or the federal level, there's always a big check attached to it. That check never comes back no matter what the outcome of the application happens to be. Now it seems that we have an additional layer to it. We have to give it to the province, we have to give it to the municipality, we have to give it to the federal government, and of course now we have to give it to the MPO, which is another bureau set up by the federal government.
We're making sure they've got enough certainty so that they can do the financing. So that's a combination of working with the Infrastructure Bank and the Canada Growth Fund, but also...
So you're going to do the job of the Infrastructure Bank and the Canada Growth Fund. Why can't they determine it on their own? Why do they need your approval? Again, bottlenecking, slowing it down, interference. This department is doing nothing of what they claim it's going to do. It's, in fact, getting in the way, just like everything the Liberal Party does.
Working with others to see how we can crowd in some private financing for them.
My rich banker friends that have investment capital in Blackstone, BlackRock, Brookfield, and many other companies. Let's see how much of it we can get them to profit off of.
And then the tough stuff is to ensure that when they get into the construction component of it, that we work with our labor group to make sure there's availability of labor.
Oh, so now you're a employment agency. Okay, I get it. So you're a banker, you're an employment agency, you're just essentially a one-stop shop for all of the permission that everybody needs, including the government bureaus that are already tasked with giving permission. Oh yeah, money well spent. I'm telling you, this is a sound investment.
That there are kinds of, there's the way that the permitting happens during construction works in a very slick and efficient way, so that we can do the construction and build the projects in the time frame they should be built in without cutting corners. You can't cut corners, but there's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained so that those projects...
There's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained by putting somebody else into the mix. That's essentially the definition of efficiency, isn't it? That's how you always streamline things. You add more people into the mix. You add more delays into the mix. That doesn't really compute in my understanding of the word streamline, but maybe I'm just not as sharp as this lady. Though it doesn't sound like this lady knows what her job is at all, and it sounds like she's just talking from page 1 of Economics 101.
Can then, deliver their operational capacity within a shorter time frame. So,
Oh, so now she's going to take over the development of the actual labor, right? The project that is going to be built. She's going to decide what their timeline is. She's going to decide what their milestones are. Oh yeah, this is wow.
Our job is all about making sure that people get across the line, get everything they need to get built on time and on budget, and ensure that Canadians have competitive mines, competitive pipelines, competitive LNG facilities, because the world only pays a certain price for our goods, and we need to meet them at those prices.
The world pays a certain price for our goods because they have the ability to get those goods cheaper due to the fact that there isn't people like you standing in the way trying to convince me that I should give a profit off of that investment to one of your investment banker friends, or a profit off of that to one of the local banks inside of the country, whereas I, as a Canadian whose taxpayers are actually funding the projects, is not getting a cut at all. I'm not getting a piece. I'm not getting a dividend. I'm not getting a share. In fact, anything that we might be looking at that will solve the problem, you just admit to yourself that you're going to have 2 years at least on the project. There is at least 4 or 5 moving parts just for the funding, which I don't understand why you should be worrying about the financing. I don't understand why you should be worrying about staffing. As far as I get it, you're supposed to determine whether or not this is a viable project to be a nation building project, and not determine whether or not somebody will loan somebody the money and who they can hire and who they cannot hire and what kind of trucks they drive and all the rest of that foolishness. Seems like we already have that looked after by the financial district. The employment always works itself out where the job is, where the houses are. Of course, there isn't going to be many houses in all of these projects. And lastly, we already have an environmental agency that looks after these kinds of things. So I submit to you, Canada, that this is just another way to get in the way, and that there's nothing going to come out of this project, or nothing going to come out of this major projects office that is a benefit to Canada. They admit freely that it's going to be at least 2 years in their lap alone, and that's without them waiting for the environmental investment bank, or whatever she called it, to give them their paperwork. That's nothing to do with other kinds of paperwork that they may be needing to wait for, assessments and all the rest of it as the province. And somehow she's going to streamline this to be running parallel, when in reality she can't do anything without the information provided to her from these other agencies. It's not like she's going to be putting people on the ground. And if she is, that can't be better. That's got to be worse. We'll have a provincial investigator. We'll have an investigator from that particular department, and we'll have an investigator from the major projects office. How in any way, shape, or form is that streamlining anything? How in any way, shape, or form is 2 years minimum, fastest since we saw the Second World War and all the rest of the stories that the Liberal government is trying to push down our throats? Without the mainstream media behind them, this story would fall apart inside of 20 seconds. That's my opinion. You can let me know what your opinion is down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.